Electric vehicles, their motors, their batteries, and their parts are expensive to replace. And if you are concerned that you are going to be putting a lot of money into your electric vehicle to maintain it, well, do not be afraid. I'm here to tell you why you should buy an electric vehicle as your next car.
What's up, guys? My name's Nick.
My name's Nathan.
And this is Full Throttle Cars. Today we are telling you why you should not be afraid to purchase an electric car for your next vehicle.
That's right, guys. We're going to be going really deep into it. We're going to be talking about maintenance. We're going to be talking about purchase price, and we're going to be talking about charging.
One of the first things you probably look at when you're going to buy a new car is the purchase price. Now, that's a very important factor and one that is at the forefront of almost every consumer's mind. Now, you're going to notice immediately that EVs do cost more than their gasoline equals. However, there are ways to bring this cost down. First off, you have government tax credits. The United States government gives many tax credits eligible on many EVs, some as much as $7,500. Now, to be eligible for these tax credits, there are some requirements you and the vehicle must meet. First, you can't earn over a certain income. I believe if you are a single filer, you cannot earn more than $150,000 in a year to be eligible for these tax credits, or if you're filing jointly, I believe the number is $225,000, which are pretty high income requirements for these tax credits. Now, moving on to the vehicle has to be manufactured or assembled at least in part in the United States. I believe depending on the year, as the years gradually go higher, we are going to be focusing more on manufacturing and assembly here in the United States. So now I believe the cutoff is 50% for how much of the vehicle and battery has to be done in the United States to be eligible for this tax credit. You can pull up a long list of vehicles that are eligible. Some are eligible for the full $7,500. Some are eligible for half. It just depends on how much of that vehicle is made here in the U.S.
Now, it might be a little bit higher of an initial purchase price like Nick was saying, but you can get some of that money back at the end of the year whenever you file your taxes and have that tax credit. And as we will continue on in this video, it will be a little bit cheaper of a vehicle to maintain and to use in terms of charging instead of purchasing gas and just in terms of general maintenance. If you guys have watched our videos in the past, you might have seen me doing a lot of maintenance on my 2008 Honda Civic that has about 290,000 miles on it. One thing that I have replaced pretty often is the brakes. Now, brakes are just a good example of how EVs do very well in terms of maintenance. And that's because they have regenerative charging capabilities. And so as you slow down in an EV, you aren't using heat and friction and losing energy. Rather, you are charging your battery and just getting extra range. So brakes aren't going to be something that you're going to constantly be replacing whenever you're using an electric vehicle. And that's just one example.
So on that maintenance idea, there are a lot less moving parts on an electric vehicle. Of course, you don't have an internal combustion engine. Without the internal combustion engine, there are so many moving parts just within the engine itself and all the sub-assemblies and subcomponents of the engine. Instead, you replace it with a battery and an electric motor. And electric motors, for one, are actually very reliable and tend to not wear out that quickly. The battery is going to be your biggest concern, but again, most manufacturers have warranties on these batteries for in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 years or around 100,000 miles.
All right, so going a little bit off of what Nick said about that, when we talk about the electric motor and just the electrical vehicle having fewer moving parts, in the electric motor, there are two main parts really. You have your stator and you have your rotor. Now the stator actually just uses magnetic fields to translate power into the rotor, and then the rotor is the only thing that is moving, and it is easy to remember, it's rotating inside of that electric motor. Whenever you compare that to the internal combustion engine, you have a lot more spinning things and even more types of motion. So your pistons are going up and down, and you need to figure out a way to translate that power to a rotating power, and that goes into your crankshaft, and then that goes into your powertrain and wheels.
So not only is there less moving parts in an electric powertrain, there's also a lot less loss and a lot less movement for the energy. In the internal combustion engine, you have chemical energy stored in the fuel tank, which then goes into the engine, which then combusts and moves the pistons in a translational motion, which then has to move the crankshaft in a rotational motion, which then that power gets sent to the transmission, then to the drive shaft, and then through the axles and the differential before it gets to the wheels. In an electric powertrain, you typically have 1, 2, or 4 electric motors, one in the back for the basic rear-wheel drive, more simple, cheaper powertrain, which then powers both the rear wheels, which you only have energy coming that's stored from the battery into the electric motor to the wheels. There's a lot less spots for loss in an electric powertrain. So another concern you're probably thinking about is, how am I going to charge this vehicle? I would say in your day-to-day use, you won't have any issue charging your vehicle. In fact, it'll be much easier to charge your vehicle than it would be to stop at a gas station. Because as soon as you get home, you plug in your car at night. By the time you wake up in the morning, it's full charge again. If you're not driving more than 50 or so miles a day, it should be able to easily recharge overnight, and typically for less than the cost of what you would put in terms of gallons of gas.
Yeah, and just talking about that, comparing it to gas, I'm not going to sit here and say that our cost of electricity is super stable, but it's definitely more stable than the cost of gasoline. So if you know how much you're going to be driving, if you like to have, your books all laid out for how much money you're going to be spending, you can definitely be a lot more consistent in how much money you're going to be spending and predict.
Yeah, and also on top of that, there are some states in the U.S., and again, we're going to mostly be focusing on the U.S. market here. That's where we're from, and that's where we have knowledge. But where you go in the U.S., gas prices vary significantly. Electricity prices also will vary, but if you look at some of the cheapest states for gas and some of the most expensive states for gas, you're talking, some cases, 3 times the price. You look in California in certain areas, it might be $6 a gallon there, or even in Hawaii, it's even more, just because of that kind of scarcity of it. You got to import everything to Hawaii. But if you look at electricity, you might not have as big a variation. You're still definitely going to have variation. But again, I think in a lot of those situations where you have very high gas costs, like in California, your electricity cost is going to be significantly less. If you take, for example, let's say, I don't know exactly what the average rate per kilowatt hour of electricity is, but let's say it's 15 cents a kilowatt hour or even 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So at 20 cents a kilowatt hour, if you have a 100 kilowatt hour battery, it takes $20 to fill the battery. But if you have, and so let's say that gets you 300 miles of range. And let's say you have a 15-gallon fuel tank, which does the same thing. At $3 a gallon, which about is what it is here in Ohio right now, that would be $45. So you're looking at double the cost to fill your gas tank as you would charging on electricity.
All right, when it comes to post-purchase price, when talking about an electric vehicle, I feel like the most common thing that people talk about is how much it's going to cost to replace the batteries whenever they do inevitably go bad. So, sometimes it can cost around $10,000 to change out your batteries in an electric vehicle that you've only had for, say, like 8 years. And that is a huge concern for a lot of people, and rightly so. But I will say, I don't think you should be too terribly concerned, because we will continue to make progress as we do research and development on batteries and on doing better at making them last longer in electric vehicles. Nick, anything to add there?
Yeah, so not only will they hopefully last longer, they'll also hopefully become more affordable and get a little bit cheaper. Not significantly, I wouldn't say, but definitely it should hopefully help bring the cost down a little bit. And again, if you say you have a $10,000 battery cost, but you only have to replace it every 10 or 15 years, that averages out to $1,000 or less per year. Now, if you also, on that same topic, most manufacturers, I believe, have at least an 8-year battery warranty. So again, if it does fail before 8 years, then you don't have to pay anything out of pocket. But if it does come down to 15 years later and you got to replace the battery, that's still not that big of a deal when you break that down over how much it would have cost every single year when you look back and see how much you saved on oil changes, how much you saved on transmission flushes, replacing a transmission, replacing an engine, which at 15 years, you're looking at probably anywhere between 100, 150, maybe even 200,000 miles. And again, at 15 years, if it's 150,000 miles, that's only 10,000 miles a year, which is less than most lease terms are. Most lease terms are like 12,000 miles a year. So if you would say you drive 12,000 miles a year, then you're even over 150,000 miles. In a lot of cars, the engines don't even last that, or they have major repairs before then. So if you have a one-time battery expense cost at year 15 or year 12 or whatever it is, it does break down into a very reasonable amount that even could be cheaper than just gasoline engine maintenance.
Yeah, that's something that we'll definitely look forward to seeing if that does happen in the future.
Alright guys, so that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope we gave you some insight and maybe ease some of your concerns about purchasing an electric vehicle. Personally, I would seriously consider purchasing an electric vehicle if I was in the market to buy a new one, if it was not my only vehicle. Now, I say that as a car enthusiast who loves to have an internal combustion engine vehicle, but for everyday use, I can think of very little better than an electric vehicle. Just first off, the practicality. You don't need to stop at the gas station. If you're using it for daily use, you'll probably never have to stop at a charging station, ever. You go to work, you come back, you go to the grocery, you come back, charge it overnight, and you're full. And again, cheaper cost than filling up the tank, as we mentioned. And I personally am not concerned about having to replace a battery in 10 years or 15 years. Who knows if I'll even own that same car in 10 or 15 years. Maybe you would, but I don't think I would hold on to the car that long anyway. And that would probably be more of a second-hand market concern. So again, if you're buying something used though, that is definitely a thing to take into account. But for a new vehicle purchase with a battery warranty, I personally have no issue or no concern in my mind about having to replace a battery.
Yeah, I feel very similar to the way Nick does on buying an electric vehicle. I would not be too concerned myself about the maintenance costs, and I would be very ecstatic actually about charging it instead of going to a gas station. Now this is just me. I'm an electrical engineer, so I personally would probably wire up myself like a 30 amp charger in my house, and so that would really help. And a lot of people could also buy or even pay an electrician to come in and wire a much larger charger than just say something you would plug into your outlet in your garage.
So that is going to do it for this video. We hope you enjoyed, and until next time, we'll see you in the next video.
Bye guys.